Hello class, this is our third week, third lecture. The topic this week is books. I have been working on this presentation now for some time, a few days. I keep adding to it, so I think I'd better freeze it now and get it recorded before it's just completely way too long. Okay, let me see here. Got to do this little doohickey whoops to try to get us the ability to do that. Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so it's books. So, questions or concerns? I want to do a very quick review of the last class, then we'll get into our topic, books. And as usual, your chapter, I think it's chapter 3 in the book on books, is really good. And I've taken a lot of the ideas from that, expanded on them a little bit, and added my own 2 cents to it. So, first section of our lecture is to talk about books as a medium. Remember, medium is the message. So, these are the things we'll go over. And then we're going to talk about development, what's the history of the book, right up to the present. And we'll talk about what the business is like today. Talk about convergence. You were going to vote on a book to talk about, one that was important to the culture. And I will try to work that in. And then we'll have some final thoughts, and then we'll talk about what's due for this week, week 3 in Blackboard content. What's your homework, what you're reading between now and the next class. Okay, so questions, concerns. Obviously, this is a recorded class, so we don't have a chance for a lot of communication, back and forth here in a synchronous way. But I just want to remind you to make sure to put down 3 things you learned and 1 thing that may be muddy or confusing after every lecture. And on Blackboard, and I will do my best to answer those questions or concerns. So in terms of reviewing our first class, we talked about one chunk of chapter 1, more or less all these things, kind of worked on definitions and how it all worked. And then in the last class, we talked about, we changed the model from one-to-one to one-to-many. So this is one person, more or less, or an organization, communicating with lots of people, lots of subcultures. And that's when you really get into, quote, mass communication, unquote. We said that probably the first real example of mass communication was Gutenberg printing Bibles and books, the first example of mass communication, and this is what we're going to talk about in this week's lecture books. We then talked about how mass communications have an effect on culture and how they reflect the culture back as well, but they are embedded in a real part of defining the culture, the shared meanings that we all have, which make up our culture. Then we talked about that the goal for this whole course is to improve your media literacy. And we define media literacy. It's interesting that the word literacy is used, and we're going to talk about that actually a little bit today in regards to books. Because literacy is a word that kind of comes from literature, which relates to books. So it just speaks to the fact that in terms of knowledge and education, books are kind of the basis, have been the basis for that for hundreds of years, and still are to a great degree. We learn to read by reading books normally. I'm not sure how much of that is changing in schools today with electronic media, electronic books, and the internet. But my guess is a lot of young students are still picking up books. So this is about, again, media literacy is kind of appreciating what each medium does, how each medium is different, has different effects on us. And it also involves us taking a harder, sharper, more critical look at the content that we are fed via mass media. Understanding the source, understanding if it's biased or not, is it citing facts or is it just opinion? Media literacy, again, say that fast 3 times, is about us becoming smarter about all the media that ends up on our plate. Okay, so that is what we talked about in the last class, those 3 things. Now we're going to go medium by medium for a while, for the next few weeks, starting with books. And then the next lecture will be newspapers, magazines, films, etc. We're kind of going to work through, just as the book does, kind of go chapter by chapter, week by week, focusing on each one of the major media. So today is books. That's a book. That is a book, printed on paper. It has weight. Here are some other books. There are some covers of the books anyway. The textbook didn't get into this too much, children's books, but I really think this is an important part of all of our experiences with books. Our reading children's books when we were young, or maybe having our parents or our guardians or older people read them to us. These are some, I just chose some of my favorites. Winnie the Pooh was read to me. The Cat in the Hat, I kind of read on my own. Goodnight Moon, Miss Spider's Tea Party, wonderful illustrations in the Miss Spider's books, by the way. And The Very Hungry Caterpillar are all books I read to my child, to my daughter, along with Curious George. And she knew every word in the Curious George books. So when we think about books, let's not just think about these texty, heavy, or paperbacked books. Let's think about illustrated books, pretty pictures in the books, especially for children. These are some of the key characteristics of books. I wanted to show you this just once. I wrote down I came up with about 30 things that I wanted to talk about for this lecture. And I'm actually just going to lay these out for you, and then we'll get to the lecture. I'm doing this because I just want to make sure that some of these things didn't really make it to the lecture, but they're still worth thinking about a little bit. So you're reading these things. Books are usually edited and checked for facts, not always, but often. Primary way that children are educated and that older folks are educated. Source of entertainment content. What I'm saying here is that lots of the movies and TV shows and other things that you see in other media in terms of entertainment started as books. If I write a play, I eventually need, or a film, I need someone to shoot it. I mean, with a play, I need a cast and a stage and a theater and all kinds of things. With a book, I just need a pen and paper or a computer. Of course, I have to convince someone to publish it, but then again, these days I can even publish it myself, so I don't really need a lot of resources to make one of these, which is something kind of different about books versus other things. Publishing is a risky business, the kind of business where I print a bunch of copies of something and I invest a lot of money before I necessarily know the book is going to be successful. Easy to lose money. Books are vehicles for groundbreaking thoughts and ideas and theories. So Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, if you've heard of those two folks, published books. The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin posited the idea of evolution. It was done via a book. In terms of the process of reading and how we as individuals relate to this medium, you mostly don't have pictures, you don't have video, you don't have sound. You mostly have words, at least for adult books. So what are you doing while you're reading? Well, you're creating mental pictures. In other words, you're using your imagination. You're almost making a video in your head. You're putting faces on the characters based on maybe people you know or actors, who knows. But basically, books require mental engagement. Okay, much more so than watching a film, if you think about it. Because with a film, it's all there for you. You don't have to engage. You just sort of let it bounce off you. With a book, your brain needs to do some work. Subject to censorship. Yeah, because they're physical objects. We want to forbid them from being certain places if we don't like the content. Books seem to be censored more than any other medium. Long lead times means that book is not a newspaper, right? It's sort of the opposite in terms of printed matter. Newspaper is here today, gone tomorrow. Newspaper normally reflects the day's events or the previous day's events. And it's printed on flimsy, inexpensive, recycled paper, which ends up, being sent back and recycled again, or it ends up on the bottom of your bird cage. A book is permanent. Okay, you don't necessarily see libraries full of newspapers or magazines. You see libraries full of books. Long lead times for the content. So again, you don't have newsy things that just happened yesterday in books. The content has been worked on a long time. It's not interactive. So here it is. Read it. There's with a hard copy book, there's not much you can do to respond to. You can make notes in it, I guess. You can write in it. You can put in your own comments and everything. But and maybe the next person who picks up the book will see those comments. But it's not generally an interactive medium. It's sort of from the source sent out. Everyone gets the same content with a book. Let's not forget about books written with Braille, by the way. Very interesting concept, Braille. So some people don't read with their eyes. They are able to read and feel the letters. Does that create a different kind of reading experience? I imagine it would. With books, they're audio books, they're electronic books. Libraries are an important phenomenon when you talk about books because they're so permanent in a way. I mean, you put a bunch of books together, maybe by topic, you organize them by topic, you use the Dewey Decimal System or whatever to classify books, and so people can look up things based on topic or author or whatever the case may be. So there's a huge library here in the U.S. called the Library of Congress. The library at Alexandria in Egypt was famed because supposedly it burned, and many of the scrolls that in those days books were scrolls. They weren't printed; they were handwritten on scrolls.